War is never a desirable outcome, but have you ever stopped to think about how long a war should last? A year, 5 years, or even 20? Do you know that over 7,000 people have been killed in the Russian war? What happens when two countries go to war? Will there be allies? Definitely, yes. Well, it's been a year since Russia attacked Ukraine. As we approach the 1-year mark, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what's happened so far and what the future may hold. Let's talk about what has happened in 1 year. Let's go. 2022 was an eventful year. Russia invaded Ukraine in a major escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian War, which began in 2014. The invasion has caused tens of thousands of deaths on both sides and Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. About 8 million Ukrainians were displaced within their country by late May, and more than 7.9 million fled the country by 3rd January 2023. On February 24, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, setting off the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. Ukraine has mounted a strong defense despite being vastly outnumbered, but Russian bombing and shelling have pummeled Ukrainian cities. Civilian casualties are growing by day, and the fighting has sparked an enormous refugee crisis. Preview to the story. Ukraine became an independent state in 1991 after the disintegration of the USSR. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe and has a large border with Russia. Russia has always been apprehensive of its security as major attacks on Russia have occurred from the western border, like in World War I and World War II. Ukraine's desire to join NATO made Russia apprehensive of its security, and it captured Crimea in 2014. Russia also supported insurgents of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in eastern Ukraine. Since the invasion in Crimea in 2014, Ukraine has been living in fear of war with Russia for nearly 8 years. Russia and Ukraine have been at odds for a long time, with Russia claiming Ukraine as a part of its country and opposing Ukraine's developing ties to the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to recapture the former Soviet Union Republic. He requested that the Ukrainian military put down their weapons prior to its cessation in 1991. Russia and Ukraine were both members of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, which consisted of 15 republics. Ukraine-Russia War, genesis of the conflict. The heat between Russia and Ukraine, a former Soviet republic, have existed for a decent amount of time. They began to escalate out of control in early 2021. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, hinted the US President Joe Biden to allow Ukraine to join the NATO forces in January of last year. This made Russia highly infuriated, which it began sending soldiers near the Ukrainian border for training exercises in the spring of last year and boosted the number in the fall. The US began to hype that there is a deployment of Russian troops, and President Joe Biden had threatened Russia with heavy sanctions if Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia wants a legally enforceable promise from the US that NATO forces will not conduct any military operations in Eastern Europe, especially in Ukraine. According to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ukraine is merely a puppet of the US and was never a real sovereign country in the first place. This isn't the first time that conflicts between Russia and Ukraine have erupted. Russia had previously invaded Ukraine in 2014. It happened when pro-Putin separatists captured major swaths of eastern Ukraine, and they have been fighting the Ukrainian army since the invasion. Russia also annexed Crimea at that time. Ukraine has extensive social and cultural ties with Russia, and Russian is widely spoken there, but those ties have deteriorated since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. When Ukraine's pro-Russian president lost in early 2014, Russia came to an offensive. Field casualties and injuries. Combat deaths can be inferred from a variety of sources, including satellite photos and videos of military action. Both Russian and Ukrainian sources are widely believed to inflate casualty numbers in opposing forces, while downplaying their own losses for the sake of morale. Russian news outlets have largely stopped reporting the Russian death toll. Russia and Ukraine admitted suffering significant and considerable losses, respectively. It was reported in April 2022 that Ukrainian claims of Russian deaths included the living injured. Against France press and independent conflict monitors could not verify Russian and Ukrainian claims of enemy losses and suspected that they were inflating. The number of civilian and military deaths is impossible to determine precisely in the fog of war. On 12 October 2022, the independent Russian media project reported that more than 90,000 Russian soldiers had been killed, been seriously wounded, or gone missing in Ukraine. Citing sources close to the Kremlin, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, estimates the number of civilian casualties to be considerably higher than the figure the United Nations has been able to certify. On 16 June, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense told CNN that he believed that tens of thousands of Ukrainians had died, adding that he hoped that the true death toll was below 100,000. In the destroyed city of Mariupol alone, Ukrainian officials believe at least 25,000 have been killed. But investigations of morgue records indicates many more, and some bodies remain uncollected. Reasons for Ukraine and Russia war. The main reason behind the Russia-Ukraine conflict, or why Russia and Ukraine are fighting, is because Ukraine acceded to NATO, which would go against Russia's wishes and continue to endanger its security. The West, according to Russia, should guarantee that Ukraine will never get permission to be part of NATO. Other reasons of the Russian-Ukraine war include economic factor. Ukraine has a large population, and it has substantial natural minerals and resources which also produce wheat and vegetable oil, which are supposed to play an important role. Ukraine's membership in the Eurasian Economic Community, EAEC, a free trade agreement that came into being in 2015, but Ukraine refused to join the agreement. Geopolitical and strategic factors. Russia opposes the eastward expansion of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which it considers a threat to the interest of Russia, and asks for written security guarantees from NATO, as NATO is a military alliance of 28 European countries which works on the system of collective security. Joining NATO of Ukraine will result in installing missiles, a missile defense system at the mouth of Moscow. Russia-Ukraine war, latest developments. Russia launched a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, and currently, according to Russia, it has launched a special military operation to demilitarize Ukraine. Russia stated that the eastward expansion of NATO and Ukraine's desire to join NATO is a reason for the deployment of the troops on the border to protect its security considerations. Russia, on its border with Ukraine, has mobilized around 1 million troops. Russia is seeking assurance that Ukraine shall not be inducted into NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, from the US. The war between Russia and Ukraine resulted in tensions between the West, the supportive nation of Ukraine, and Russia. Russia's stand on Ukraine crisis. In the war between Russia versus Ukraine, Russia does not want the eastward expansion of NATO, including Finland. Russia desires Ukraine to be neutral and under its influence. Russia wants written security guarantees not only in Ukraine, but also in pulling NATO forces from Poland and Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The president of Russia justified the Ukraine crisis on the ground of security interests and the rights of ethnic Russians. Presently, Russia wants an assurance that in the future, Ukraine will never be allowed to join NATO from the West. Ukraine is refused as part of NATO by the United States and its Western allies by claiming that Ukraine is free to choose its security alliances as a sovereign nation. Peace efforts. Peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine took place on 28 February, 3 March, and 7 March 2022 in an undisclosed location in the Gomel region on the Belarus-Ukraine border, with further talks held on 10 March in Turkey prior to a fourth round of negotiations which began on 14 March. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba stated on 13 July that peace talks are frozen for the time being. On 19 July, former Russian president and current deputy head of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, said Russia will achieve all its goals. There will be peace on our terms. By 29 December, following the Russian annexation of multiple Ukrainian oblasts, hopes for Ukrainian peace talks with Russia dimmed significantly, with Russia taking a hardline position that the full Russian occupation of the 4 oblasts would be non-negotiable under any circumstances. Foreign aid. Although Ukraine is not a member of NATO and does not have any military alliance with the United States or with any NATO nation, the Kiel Institute has tracked $84.2 billion from the 40 countries and the European Union in financial, humanitarian, and military aid to Ukraine from 24 January to 3 August 2022. NATO is coordinating and assisting member states in providing billions of dollars in military equipment and financial aid to Ukraine. The United States has provided the most military assistance, having provided over $24.8 billion. Many NATO allies, such as Germany and Sweden, have reversed past policies against providing offensive military aid in order to support Ukraine. The European Union, for the first time in its history, supplied lethal arms and has provided $3.1 billion to Ukraine. Bulgaria, a major manufacturer of Soviet-pattern weapons, has covertly supplied more than $2 billion worth of arms and ammunition to Ukraine, including a third of the ammunition needed by the Ukrainian military in the critical early phase of the invasion. Bulgaria also provides fuel supplies and has at times covered 40% of the fuel needs of the Ukrainian armed forces. We now have come to the end of this video. If you like this, you'll definitely love our next video. We'll be going behind Ukrainian borders, checking if Russia is collapsing. Do well to hit the subscribe button and like the video. Tap the bell icon to get notifications of our weekly videos and updates.